Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on these two red wiggler worm bins, and the stuff that I came down with from the kitchen can be seen here. This is some old leftover noodles, didn't get used up with the soup, and a couple banana peels as well as some soiled paper towels under here. I've also got some coffee off on the side as well as a couple surplus coffee filters that I had hoped to make use of as bedding today. And you see that little moving black speck right there? That's a flying insect, a little fruit fly or a gnat or whatever the heck it is. And even last time when we came in here to check on these little guys, we found similar activity in here. Over here too, when I was bringing the containers over, I spotted two flying insects, and when you see one that looks like just a slightly larger one like that right there, they're actually connected back to back, actively mating right here in front of us. So I'm growing concerned that perhaps these cardboards are contributing to providing the flying insects with maybe some sort of place to live down in the flutes of this corrugated cardboard. So I think I'm going to attempt to eliminate the flying insect issue by possibly not giving them a place to camp out. So I'm going to remove those top covering cardboards, which were really just laid out as shade covers. That was really the only purpose that they were serving, but I think the systems can do okay without shade covers, especially if the shade covers are going to, translate into becoming a problem when it comes to the flying insects. We finally have an extended forecast here, which not even in the overnight predicted temperatures show any signs of it dropping below freezing. So I think there's a warming trend underway. I think we're only really a couple weeks away from the official start of spring as well. So summer could very well be in the in the rear view mirror at this point. So now this is the system where we placed gourds into the bins. And we kind of made the decision to take the gourds, because what I did was I took the gourds and I cut them in half, because the gourds were just sitting in here, and they're very, very thick gourds. Thick the skin, I mean, Sometimes I've had occasion to put gourds into the worm bins and observe their breakdown over time. But I'm not sure I've ever seen one that's got thick walls like these gourds that we have in these bins. So I think, all right, that's interesting. So for whatever reason, the worms really do enjoy sneaking into these little cavities. So for whatever reason, they love diving down into that hole over there. I would imagine that this hollow segment here too probably has a bunch of worms down in the hole there. But I believe it was a couple check-ins ago where we might have mentioned something about how it's going to take quite some time for the gourds to break down, and that continuously checking in on them is probably not going to make for much very interesting video, other than the part where we evict the worms occupying the cavity of the cut open gourds and seeing the little worm party that results. But I have been trying to orient these things in such a way that the cavity is facing up and that the foods that we give them are placed down into the cavity so as to promote worm traffic. Alright, so another very tough, slow composting item is this mango seed here, although I think that what's inside of this husk is what's the actual seed. I'm not sure if what's protecting the seed is actually the seed. This is just some sort of an outer protective shell. Yeah. Just like many of my other systems, I feel like I've been perhaps a little bit overzealous with the application of bedding, leading me to that feeling like I'm working my way out of having adequate space to work the way I like to work, which is to, dig deep and create mounds of material. So I think we're going to go a little bit easier on the bedding especially in these types of systems where it seems like we've got perhaps a surplus. So I've got, yeah, these couple of soiled paper towels, and besides the coffee I bought down, I've got a few surplus coffee filters. I think that's going to be the extent of what we're going to apply as bedding today. Just in the interest of kind of backing off and not allowing ourselves to run into a situation in my systems where I feel like I've just not left myself adequate space to work the way I like to work. So well, we'll try that for a little while. Now, I don't have the exact numbers here, but I do believe that these are a couple of my more heavily populated systems. And I don't just pull the estimated worm count numbers out of the air. It is actually a joint effort between all the viewers who comment and myself, where we take everyone's estimates or guesstimates of worm bin populations and take all the guesstimates and average them so that we come up with some sort of a number that represents everyone's guess. Man, look at the size of this gourd. And I think what makes this system here, the younger one, which only last check-in 10 days ago had hit its 100th days in service, so it's 110 days old now, but I believe what we came up with as far as the estimated worm count in this system is over 4,000 worms. So even last time when we were in here, it seemed like anywhere I dug down to grab a handful of material, I always ended up with a large quantity of worms in that scoop of material. And yeah, I definitely remember this piece too. There must be something about this piece that they really like, because it always seems very, very popular. I mean, it's brimming with stuff, and the stuff that it's brimming with is mainly worms. So I know, I always grab these sort of novelty items with worms crawling all over them and hold them in front of the camera. I just can't resist. Uh-oh, okay, buddy. Sometimes I feel like holding it right over there in the middle, over this gap between the systems is not a good idea, because if I'm not paying attention, a worm could drop off and end up in between the bins on the bench, on the dry paper tablecloth, and that wouldn't be good for the poor wormies. All right, one more quick gawking session and then we'll get to feeding. What an unusual feeling having these little guys squirming between your fingers trying to duck out of the bright lights. And surprisingly, I've not seen even one of them drop off my hand yet. But I think it's time to get on with the show. Let's finish excavating this feeding zone here and making room for today's delicious meal. And you know, one thing I didn't notice were those fairly large chunks of cardboard that we rested in between portions of the food. And perhaps the place to really go looking for it would have been the less heavily populated system. The more heavily populated system just has that many more worms working on this stuff. So let's let's press on. Yeah, you could see fairly busy spot down here in these systems. So let's start in with these fairly soiled pieces of paper towel. I'm not the type to just take a piece of paper towel to pick up some moisture off the counter and then chuck it in the trash. I'll usually hang on to it if it was only water that had been picked up with it, and then set it aside so that perhaps it could be used for a dirtier job later before being discarded. And then even now, after it's completed its service in the kitchen, it's coming down here to continue its usefulness. So let's see, we got some lovely cooked noodles here, and sometimes I'll even eat a handful or two of just cooked noodles because they are pretty tasty even on their own. I was about to just grab these couple handfuls of noodles and actually eat them, but they just didn't smell quite fresh or right anymore. So I figured, you know what, let's give it to the worms instead of eating it. And let's not forget to get all these objects down in here before we come in with the remainder of the yummy foods, because I think there is a good advantage to piling the newly added foods directly on top of the, especially these tougher things, these older things that you'll want to see gradually worked down. So let's see here. We're going to come in with some coffee here and some coffee here, and we could use those as replacement feeding zone indicators, because you may have noticed that I took the old feeding zone indicators and laid them down here in the feeding zones already. Let's take half of each of these banana peels and then create a little banana burrito, so that we give the worms motivation to crawl down inside of these coffee filters in pursuit of the yummy foods. And I believe that right there should make for a pretty lovely feeding that the worms should appreciate, I hope. Well, perhaps not so much appreciate, at least enjoy and find refreshing and help satisfy their appetites. So let's see here. These two will be set aside to be used as feeding zone indicators, but before I start covering up these feeding zones, I'm dropping in a little bit of pulverized eggshell. Man, I really find myself being super generous with the grit these days for some reason. I don't know why. Perhaps it's because I find myself in surplus mode with so many things, and eggshells are even one of those things that I see stacking up, so I feel like I'm trying to stay ahead of the game and make sure I use everything that I've already got pulverized, so that I can make room for the newly acquired stuff that is piling up every now and then. So sometimes when I excavate these outer edges to bring in material for covering up the feeding zone and leveling things off, I do kind of question sometimes, hey, how come I'm not seeing so many worms out there? And then I guess the answer is pretty logical. It's because I'm feeding down the middle, not in the outer edges. Other times I worry that maybe it's because perhaps there's insufficient moisture in the systems. But I don't think that insufficient moisture is the explanation here. I think things feel pretty good in here, especially over here. This feels a little bit even more moist and damp than the older system here. I think we made that same observation last time too, how things in here were on the brink of getting a little bit muddy. So here, blending in all this leafy matter that's out on the surface is definitely going to, I think, help prevent things from getting all clumped together and muddy. So let's see about blending in some of these leaves with this really damp stuff. Yeah, you know, here, dryness on the outer edges is definitely not an issue. Not even a consideration, because things out on the edges of this system here are actually quite damp and quite heavily populated as a result of it. Not surprising. The worms really like the nice and damp conditions. So it was kind of fun walking in on the system and finding all those lovely leaves scattered out across the top. And, you know, I think we're going to do a little bit more of the same. So I didn't prepare for doing the leaf application, because I didn't even have the leaves out here on the bench, but luckily they're within arm's reach and we can adapt to the ever-changing game plan. Well, that's the thing. I usually don't come in here with any sort of a set game plan. I mean, perhaps I'll have concerns in the back of my mind based on observations of flying insects and wanting to at least follow up on those sorts of things to make sure I don't let a bad situation get worse. But I also think there's value in remaining flexible and being able to adapt to changing conditions and not getting too caught up in any one particular approach. So I just sprinkled in a little bit of this Mosquito Dunks BTI solution, or not even solution. I'm so used to calling it a solution because normally I would create a solution out of this stuff, but I've more recently adopted the approach of just grinding up the Mosquito Dunks and using it dry. It just seems a little bit tidier and more convenient this way. And hopefully that's not even what's going to resolve things here. Hopefully just the removal and exclusion of the shade covers will be enough to give the flying insects no place to hide, and hopefully oh, there's another one. Well, whatever. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But hopefully getting rid of the cardboard's the trick to solving that issue. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.